Welcome to the monthly webinar for the statewide IT procurement. This month, we're going to be talking about some key IT procurement initiatives, mainly the OneForm, but I like to catch up on other stuff that we did. But thank you for taking this time to join us for IT procurement. This is our third in this session. So in previous meetings, we've talked about our dashboard in February, and we talked about delegations in March. So I want you to know you can go to the statewide procurement site, which I included a link on our page. If you go to that link, it takes you to our statewide procurement page. And if you scroll to the bottom of the page, there's a section called Statewide IT Procurement News. It has 4 blocks on the bottom, but it has all the blogs and recordings of the previous presentations that we have given. And it has other really good and helpful information for IT procurements. I did want to do an update on tariffs, which has been in the news lately. Right now, we have not had any requests for increases for our bulk purchasing. As far as I know, once we do get a request, we'll have 30 days before we have to update the price. The situation still remains fluid because it seems like every day either there's a tariff going in or they're going out or they're excluding electronics from the tariff. So right now there hasn't been any change in prices. So if the vendor is trying to increase their prices, make sure you escalate it because our pricing should still remain the same. And when it does, and if it does go up, we'll notify everyone so that you do know. I do know that a lot of folks have taken our advice and have ordered stuff well ahead of time. And some of the vendors have mentioned they've had a fabulous quarter so far. Of course, they're expecting the end of year to not be as robust as traditionally. One of the important things that I think it's always important for us to talk about is the importance of procurement. I think in today's world, when you look at DOGE is doing at the federal level and what possibly Dave might be doing at our statewide level, one thing that's kind of consistent with those things is they're not procurements that they're looking at where you might have situations of fraud or spending that really wasn't vetted properly for accountability or value or efficiency. And it's very possible that that will put an increased role upon procurement and what we do for procurement in the state of North Carolina and even nationwide. Why are we doing these reviews? It's to keep our agency, to keep the state out of the news so that we're not making a story like so many of the stories that we have seen where a procurement was done and there was some type of fraud or something done that wasn't proper. That's what we're trying to do. Something I always like to share, and I think I did last time, but we can't reiterate this too much, is this little clause that's in the P&C procurement manual. It's in the general statute, I believe, 143-58. Any contracts that are not procured in accordance with state procurement laws or rules shall be void and of no effect. In addition, the executive officer or the secretary of any agency shall be personally liable for the cost of any such contract. I did like to read it because I think it's very important. You know, in a world where sometimes we're often criticized for not doing things fast enough, it's good to know that we're really doing things for the best interest of our agency, for the taxpayers, but it's also for the best interest of the people that we're reporting to. Our secretary always, she wants us to move fast, but she wants us to keep her out of the papers and to do everything correctly. And that's always good to know and to remember that that's one of our primary roles. And we can do both if we do it right. Another thing that's in the news with potentially decreasing budgets and money's going to get tighter is how procurement can drive savings. And I just want to share with everyone the abnormal quantity savings that we get at statewide IT procurement. So the way this works is many of the vendors on our bulk contracts will only give us so much of a discount. And the reason for that is if they have in a state contract in North Carolina that they're giving 10% off list price, there's other contracts that they would have to match that in other states and other entities. And so they're only going to go so low on that contract. So we are then able on bigger purchases to negotiate a larger discount with many of those vendors. And most of you are familiar with our bulk purchasing agreements and our abnormal quantity savings. But I just like to share, if you want to, this is publicly available. If you go to the webpage here and go to IT procurement dashboards, it will give you information on our abnormal quantity savings and also on the purchases that we made for the last couple of years. So it'll give you that. And here's our savings for the last 2 years and what we've done so far this fiscal year. You can see quite a bit, over 130 million each year. And so far this year, we're already at 130 million, and we still have 2 or 3 months to go, which should take us much higher for this year. So that's just our abnormal quantity savings. That's not the savings that your teams get when you're doing an RFP or we're negotiating other savings. But there's going to be continuous pressure for us as a state to negotiate savings, to find more efficiencies, to be more accountable, and to start looking at contracts to see if we're getting the best possible price. And while I think that number is really good, I think it shows that what can be done, but I think there's also a lot of opportunity out there for us. When you look at some of the numbers from the last 3 fiscal years, you can see that we've done a whole lot of RFQs. So RFQs, we may or may not be negotiating any type of price discount. RFPs, we probably need to be doing more RFPs, even though folks look at RFPs as painful. They don't necessarily need to be. Once we have a good process and we get a good statement of work, it many times can be one of the quickest outcomes with the most beneficial result as far as economics and efficiency. And then the other is our state contracts and our IFBs. When we look at that, the number of RFQs that we've done where we are not competitively bidding things can be alarming. There's often very good reasons for them. It's why we sign off on it. But it's sometimes what we're talking about and what we're trying to change in the state with the OneForm is to get procurement involved earlier in the process. And I think when we're involved earlier, we'll be able to get better objectives in the long run. So there's lots of opportunity for us, and I think we could be entering a budget period where that opportunity will be even more important. And I think all of us together can show the importance and value of procurement. Just remember the key to it is accountability, value, efficiency, and we'll work to improve the process all the way through. So that brings us to the OneForm and what the main topic is for today. Oftentimes, I know in the last 2 presentations, I talked about the 10-step procurement process, and it's a nice linear process. It looks, boy, that's just easy. You start on one end and you go straight down it, and you're at the very end. But then we start taking a look at this process from the end user's perspective. And we realize that it's not as simple as it might look in that diagram. And I say this 10-step procurement process, I should say the 10-step IT procurement process, because as part of that process, we also have the Enterprise Project Management Office, EPMO, where they need to look at it if it's a project. And then we have a privacy threshold analysis where we're looking at security and we're looking at privacy. And then you have to put the requisition in Ariba. So when I start looking at our process from an end user perspective, or if I'm working in the agency and I'm trying to do something, what I see is a bunch of silos. I see the intake form going one way, the PTA form, which is the privacy threshold analysis, it goes into another somewhat area of a silo. Now in DIT, we work very closely together, but the processes still sometimes can remain quite independent and quite siloed. And I definitely have had situations where somebody has come and they've been frustrated where they've said, we completed the intake form for EPMO. Can we issue the PO now? Or we got approval. Can we issue the PO? And we're kind of like, well, have you put it in the sourcing tool? And that has not been done. So then it's been put in the sourcing tool, and then they put it in the PTA and got approval in the PTA, and they're ready to cut the PO. And it just seems like there's one step after another where we're just stopping you from getting what you need to be done. And I guess that works better when you see the slide with the silos. But I recognize that there's sort of a disjointed procurement process where we have a number of different things that have to happen in procurement, not all of them related to procurement, but our office is responsible for coordinating all those reviews that have to happen. And from an end user or from an agency perspective, it can seem like sometimes we might just be a big roadblock preventing you from what you need to do to get done, because the agency is at the center, and then you're trying to get through this whole process that oftentimes could be siloed. So we've heard that there's too many paths, that it's really confusing. It's hard to understand. It's easy to get lost. I've been to a conference recently, and it talked about paint the picture or tell the story of how procurements happen. So in our state, a lot of times the procurement cycle I see, we're on a biennial budget. So the budget passes in August, and then the agency works to determine what to buy. So we might start doing some research, might start looking. Maybe the engineers have an idea of what they want, but you start looking. Vendors often start calling you after you get a budget item because they want to sell you stuff. And so a few months go by, all of a sudden we're into November, December, and that's where we get a little more serious as an agency to determine, okay, what do we want to do? How do we want to get it? Next thing we know, we're into January, February, and we start doing more intensive market research, which could include some vendor reviews. So there's so many times when we get an RFQ and the agency has told us, well, we did vendor reviews and this was the best one, and this one was the one that we were selected. And that occurred, 6 months ago or quite a bit ago. But we do those vendor reviews and we kind of settle on a vendor, and then we start creating the solicitation. And many times that involves us in statewide procurement and even in the agency procurements, where we say, wow, we have to back up. We have to start from the beginning. We have to do an RFP, or if we are able to do an RFQ, now the vendor knows that they're going to get the contract. So then we really work on creating that solicitation, which is also the legal binding contract. So that's what makes it so complicated. So we start working on that in June, and delays occur oftentimes through that because now EPMO, ESRMO, privacy, everybody there now is getting involved, and we're already 3 quarters down the road to the procurement, and it's really hard to play catch up. It's a lot harder for EPMO to start a project once everything's already in flight, or for security, for us to change the security requirements when you're already deciding on a vendor in some senses, or when the end user, the party that wants to buy it, has already kind of decided on a vendor. So what it looks like is just statewide procurement, and what we're trying to do, which is help make the procurement better, help provide great security. It comes across as a big roadblock. So finally we get the solicitation done in late fall, and then we make an award sometime in June of the following year after a big long negotiation. And the end result is just a lot of frustration by everyone involved in the process. We're frustrated because, why did we even do an RFQ? We could have competed this and saved the state 20 or 30%. You're frustrated because you were ready to buy, or the end user is frustrated. Sometimes the end user doesn't include agency procurement as well, and we recognize that. But the agency procurement is often frustrated as well. And it's just not it's not how a business would operate. And we need to operate more like a business. After thinking about that frustration and looking at the process and finding a way we can do it, we figured, let's ask the wizard on how to fix it. And the wizard went to work for us and came up with OneForm and OnePath. Really, what happened here is we engaged one of our partners to look at it for us, and they gave this suggestion. And I remember the conversation I had when they presented to us is that our procurements were going down many paths, and it's frustrated to the end user. But if we could go down one path, it becomes much easier for the end user, because now you don't have to go and do an EPM form, or you do a ESRMO form, or it's not 4 different processes and you just keep having to start a new process over. Now it's just something where once you start going down the path, you can see the finish line down the road. You can see that big castle at the end of the finish line, and then you're just down the path, and hopefully it can flow much smoother. So what does the OneForm do? What do we mean by OneForm, OnePath? The OneForm will create the EPMO intake form. It'll create the PTA form, the privacy threshold analysis, which is what security and privacy use to help their determination. It determines if something is IT or not IT. So it will ask you, and we'll review this, but it will ask you questions to make that determination. Creates the procurement intake form. It creates the sourcing project in Ariba. In a future enhancement, we'll use it to create the requisition in Ariba. And then it uses AI to create initial market research. So it'll just give you a basic idea of what the market looks like. Remember, and the OneForm is designed to be used at the very beginning of the process. So before you even thought about this. So the market research isn't hugely extensive. It'll get better as we develop the AI model better, but it will kind of give you an idea of, oh, wow, there's a lot of competitors in this market, or it just gives you a brief overview of what's going on. So again, the whole purpose of the OneForm is you complete the OneForm, and now you're down the path to procurement. You know, it's not one of those things where you get started on the path and we're kind of like, oh, have you done the PTA? Or, oh, have you done this? You know, you're on the path. It'll be sequential, it'll be step by step, and we'll keep driving towards the end. But more importantly than that, we'll also try to work with you to get to the end as quickly as possible. We'll be the escorts going down the path. The OneForm, it's really divided into four sections. The reference questions and the demographic questions, you can kind of group those together, but those are just simple: name, email address, other identifying numbers. So as I said, name, email, other identifying numbers. Again, when you get into the demographic part, it gets a little more, your agency, items like that. Now, one of the interesting areas is it IT or not IT? So that's the next. And what we do there is we ask 5 questions. And if any one of the questions is a yes, it's not going to ask you the next one. 2 key areas are, if it connects to the statewide system, it's considered IT. And the reason, and that's even if you're just doing a download into the system. But all I can tell you is, think of our IT system as a house or a big complex. And there's all kinds of people that are trying to get into the house, trying to infiltrate the house. We get 660,000 attacks. I think it's a year. A lot. That's a lot of attacks, that are verified attacks. We get more attacks than that, but most of them can't get through even a little bit. These are attacks that have some credibility to them. So we know somebody's trying to pick the lock on the door to get in. That's a lot, 660,000 a year. And they're trying to get in to get to your social security number, my number, your tax records, your medical records, anything they can get their hands on. And anything that connects to the system is an entryway into the house. So if you have a download every night to get some data from another system, and it's just doing a download every night, well, that's a key into the system. And that's what our security team has to deal with every day, because a lot of the time systems don't get hacked by the big companies. The I don't want to name any company names, but by the giant companies, they get hacked by the little companies that are on the outside that just have a small back door into the house. And that's where they have the most luck, like getting in that way. And so it's the responsibility of IT and why our ESRMO and why we need to review it as an IT procurement if it has any connection into our system. The second big question is data. The Secretary of IT is responsible for protecting the data of the citizens of North Carolina. So that is why if it's medium or high risk, even if it's stored in a separate system, it's critical for us to review it for IT because of that responsibility to protect citizen data. The last three is, usually if the first two are no, it's probably going to be no for the last three, but those are just there to cover, probably 1% of procurements will get that far with where you might have a yes in those last three questions. But this is there to steer it towards IT or not IT. We want to prevent a situation where you ask P&C and they give one answer, and then you ask us at Statewide and you get another answer and it bounces back and forth. I mean, if you're unsure, we can answer these questions together. And what we want to do is give you an answer. And if we're right or wrong, let's go with that and get your procurement done. If we say it's not IT, but it turns out to be IT, we'll work with our partners and friends over at P&C to make sure the procurement gets done right, and vice versa. We'll work to, we'll work on those fringe cases. The important thing is that we can protect the state data and that we protect the state system. But there could be some, maybe they're lower. The data isn't that important. It might be data that we don't care about, but security might still need to look at it just because even though it's not high level data, there might be some concern there. So that's something where maybe it's not an IT procurement, but they still need to look to see how that data is being stored. And the one caveat I will say is in today's world with AI has made privacy even more critical because data that might not seem too important or too high level, when you're using AI and you're able to link 5 or 6 different data points together, all of a sudden that data might be meaningful where you wouldn't think it was in a non-AI world. The next thing is it an EPMO project or not? So these questions are the same questions that are on the EPMO intake form. The way this OneForm was designed is we took all the forms that you have to complete when you do an IT procurement and we combine them into OneForm, obviously, right? This is also designed to help you determine if it's an EPMO project. And the first step of the procurement process is actually EPMO doing a final determination to verify if it isn't an IT project or just to verify the answer. But using the OneForm, it will create the EPMO project in Touchdown and allow them to make a decision of whether it's IT or not. So if you get no, I think it's no's here, but if you have no's for all these answers, it will not create a project. But they'll still look at it in step 1 of the procurement to see, okay, did we get this right or not on whether or not it's a project or not. And then the last section of the OneForm really just determines, it's actually the toughest section because it has a lot of security questions. It has some questions that whenever I filled it out with people, we've had to rely on the security people to answer these questions. So security, your privacy team, your CIO, that's who you want to go to. Now I'll take you to the OneForm to do a live demo. This is what it looks like. It's really just a Microsoft form. The first key thing is you can click on this link right here and it will take you to an Excel document. So in testing this, we did some live versions, and the first time we did it with this one team, it took a little time to fill everything out. The second time we did it, they went and took this Excel sheet and filled out all the answers ahead of time. And then when we went to do it, we did it with them. We were done in maybe 20 minutes, had great answers, because in some ways it was just cutting and paste. But there's your identifying questions, or what I called the first two sections that I talked about. Your IT related questions to see if it's IT or not. Your EPMO questions, again, the final questions. And like I said, this is the hardest part, where there's a lot of questions. A lot of the questions are, depending on the answer, there may or not be an additional question or two on that. But just so you know, there's an Excel document that you can use to answer the form ahead of time. And then here is the OneForm, your agency name. And I am just going to, I'm not going to complete this for real. So I'm just going to put some questions in just to give you a feel for what this looks like. Requester is James Tan. My email. I couldn't find any way to get to the next one without just answering these, but this will give you an idea too, though. And you want to make sure you get all this information correct, of course. So you have a procurement project, you have the requester name, and then you have the procurement project owner name. So in the Reba sourcing tool, this will be the procurement project owner in the Reba sourcing. It will go and fill this person out as that. And then title of IT need. So, what are you going to name the project? And then your need by date. We always just need it tomorrow, right? So, but obviously we ask for a realistic need by date. That's going to get filled into Ariba. Your commodity code, do your research ahead of time so you have a good solid commodity code, because that could be key, down the road as it gets filled out. Your procurement project or program description, get a good description of it. It's limited. You have to have at least 30 characters, but give a good detailed answer here. The good news is you can actually cut and paste if you need to. Solicitation vehicle type. You can fill this out here. And then when we get to step one, phase one of the procurement, we'll meet and we can actually discuss which is the best option. You might think you need to do an RFP, and we might get there and say, hey, there's a state contract we can use, which, or we can use a statement of work through 920S. We can have that discussion there. Your problem statement, there's all these questions about there. Again, I'm not going to put a big, long, get as detailed as possible. And I'll give you, all of this information feeds the AI down the road. So as, the better answer you can give here, the better results it will give us for AI. And down the road, there's a very good chance that this would be even able to create the solicitation documents for you. And then this is almost a little bit redundant, but list the key features needed. It's a little bit different, but it's also a little the same. So specifics help, because again, this is gonna, if you don't put down here exactly what the features are you need, it's really hard to purchase the right product. It's just like when you're going out to buy a car, you don't walk into the lot and say, well, I just need a car. Usually you need, do you need a pickup truck? Do you need a station wagon? Do you need 4-wheel drive, 2-wheel drive? What color? You want all of those key features needed and listed here. And of course, sector or industry, it helps identify that as much as possible. Product or service. I will say also, we have worked with PNC on this. So it's, if your answer is no, like it's not IT, it will then just direct you to the PNC page. But it is possible where they could have a similar questionnaire, product or service. I'm just putting anything in here. So obviously, you would give a little more detail here, but then you go to next. And now it's going to ask you, is this an IT related procurement? I'm going to say, no, it doesn't connect to the state, but it is state data. So we go yes, and now I'm on to the next section. Is it an IT project? Has it already been created in Touchdown? If it has, you're just going to hit yes and put the project number in there. If it's no, it will ask you the EPMO questions. I'm just going to say yes, so I can just move on in the form. Is the sourcing project already created in Ariba? I'm going to say no. An IT procurement intake form. This is kind of weird because you have to put yes on here, even though just to fill it out. But then again, you're going to just put contract value, your budget. Usually this is probably going to be not related, but you might have a previous contract you're working off of, something like that you could put there. If you have any federal partners, that's always good to know. Your target contract award date. Again, we always want it tomorrow, right? Any market research you've already done. Again, be as specific as possible. I'm just going to put NA here, even though the way I filled it out, it shouldn't. Add comments. So then here it's what template will you use? I think we said RFP. Let's just say you're an agency and you have add additional DHHS health related terms. I don't know if that's even a true thing, but I'm just showing, like how that could work. In this case, we'll say DOJ legal with agency legal. And then you can identify your strategy for hub here. Comments. And now we're on section 7. I'm not going to go through all these questions. You have an idea of how the form works. I will say that when you get to this section, let's just say you haven't completed a PTA. So now it's going to ask you the questions to complete the PTA. It also helps if you have a PM office, project management office, if you have that information for who the PM, the title is, their phone number. Again, I would recommend using that Excel document ahead of time, and then you can answer these questions. I'll show you some of the questions when you get in here. It could be kind of tedious, and that's where it helps. This part should be filled out with your security/privacy person. Also, if you want to do this, or if you're using this, I don't mind sitting in with you the first time or two that you do these, because it helps us in designing this, how we can design it better. When you get to the end, it'll just ask you if you want to keep a draft copy of it, or if this should be the final. If you're not quite sure, you need to go back to get some answers, you can keep a draft and come back to it, or you can just complete it. And then what happens? So let me go back to the PowerPoint. So let's just say we completed that form. What happens? So overnight, it's not immediate, but overnight, the EPMO intake form will be completed and you will have a project in Touchdown. The PTA form will be completed and you will have a active PTA form in process. The procurement intake form will be completed and attached to the Ariba sourcing project in Ariba. And what that PTA form is really that Excel document that I showed you with all the answers completed in. So that Excel document is kind of helpful because it has all the information you need about the procurement in one place, at least at the start of the procurement. And then overnight, it'll develop the initial market research, and you will get an email the next day with the market research to kind of help start your procurement. So we talked about what happens overnight with the procurement, with the OneForm, but then what happens next? The goal then is to arrange a meeting with key players determined by the size of the project. So from DIT, we can have a BRM assigned. We can have somebody from security, from EPMO, privacy, legal, statewide, any other people to give feedback. And from the agency, you would want all the key stakeholders from the agency. And the first thing we're looking at from a procurement perspective is our procurement strategy. And that could be supplier optimization. So there's many times we get procurements and we have 3 other agencies using a similar solution, but they're all different. So maybe we should have looked at that optimization strategy, and we could have negotiated a better deal if all the agencies used the same one and we got better savings. Because when you think of this from a ESRMO, a security perspective, if we have 3 different vendors, that's 3 new entryways into our system where we could be hacked. That's 3 new systems that they have to learn to support and learn to defend. Whereas if we have supplier optimization, it makes it a little easier for everybody involved, but we also get some efficiencies possibly and economies of scale and negotiation power. So we can kind of look at that as something, in our procurement strategy. We can look at doing a competitive RFP. We can look at an IFB. Do we have a state contract or another? We already see what we might have a lot of instances for an RFQ, but maybe we can start looking at that RFQ and use some resources that we'll have here at Statewide to look to see what other states are paying for a similar sourceware, a similar solution, so that we can negotiate the best price possible. All of this is hard to do if we're in the scenario I talked about, where the procurement is a year and a half old and we need to spend the money in the next 2 months and we're struggling just to get the documents done to get completed. And so we want that involvement from DIT to be consultative in nature and not a roadblock in nature, especially from procurement, but also EPMO has a lot of resources that can be better utilized to achieve success. Security, we have a new chief security officer, and she is phenomenal and can really help guide our strategy for security across the state if we're involved earlier in that process. EA architecture is becoming increasingly more important. And the worst case scenario is that when we're 3/4 of the way through the procurement process, but we're just starting to involve architecture, and maybe it really doesn't quite fit with our system. That office is phenomenal and they do the best to make it work, but it's not always the best way to operate. And so they can help at the beginning to make sure we're more consistent. And that goes through for privacy, data, all the other organizations. If we can complete the OneForm at the beginning of the process, we can get some alignment. What we look at is, when should we do the OneForm? Let's say everything goes well with legislators and we get a budget in August. Now, last time it came out in November, right? But maybe they will get it done in August. The first thing we want to start doing is seeing where all the money is spent, completing a OneForm, and getting everyone involved to help get the procurements launched, so that we remember the old procurement path, right? The old path to procurement, where we did this market research and nobody was really on the same page. And the new procurement path we're looking at is alignment. I think with alignment, proper alignment, it'll lead to a quicker path to procurement. When I've shown some folks this and we talked about it, they were kind of like, wow, if we're involved right there, we might not even need to approve it down the road because we were already involved here in helping get this procurement. So the idea is to set the procurement up right at the beginning. So when a budget passes in August, we submit a OneForm as soon as possible, and we're already looking at a procurement strategy. We're already, instead of trying to be our procurement team a roadblock for you down the end, we're already saying, hey, this is the path that you can take. You can just follow this road, and it's a nice straight path. And I think it'll be successful for you. And we can set up a meeting with all the stakeholders right there at the beginning. So we're all, this is what security looks like. Oh, wow, we have privacy concerns. Are they using AI? How do we address that? we can get all that lined up so that they're not obstacles down the road. They're just boxes we can check down the road because we already included them in our process for purchasing something. So then we develop that strategy, and we do that in September and October. In this example, we release an RFP in November, and then we have vendor demonstrations. Now, before, those vendor demonstrations were part of market research. So they were kind of like, oh, let's do this to help us figure out what we want to buy. Maybe with everybody involved, we have that done, and we get that solicitation done. And when we're doing those demos, that's part of the RFP, so that when they get done in January, it allows you to finish your evaluations in February, and then we're done. We're done in March of the first year. Wouldn't that be phenomenal? Within one budget year, less than one budget year. And then let's just say it's a tough one, and we have a little bit of a vendor negotiation in March because the vendor's being a little difficult and wants to negotiate some terms. It's not going to seem as bad if we're that far ahead, if it takes 2 or 3 months or 4 or 5 months even to negotiate that, because before we were 1.5 years, 2 years into the process, and there was just so much focus on, getting that piece of it done. But now even a delay there isn't going to feel so bad because we're kind of like, well, we just want it done by the end of the year. So it gives us a much more relaxed feel, less frustration. And I think it leads to a better outcome in the end. I see a question in here. Multiple people are needed to fill out the OneForm. If you think about it, currently it's 4 different forms. The first time I filled it, it was long and it was more difficult. The more I filled it out, the easier it gets. And I think that's how it will be for you. Some of the questions for security and privacy, you can't really answer at the very beginning. So you kind of learn what those questions are. But I would recommend having a good project manager, a good security person, and you can work together to get those answers and get everything off on the right start. Yeah, good question about the existing project in Touchdown. How do you keep from creating a separate project? This does ask you if there is an existing project in Touchdown, and you would just say, yes, there is an existing project. That was how I actually filled it out. I think somewhere it actually even asks you the Touchdown project number, but it does accommodate that if you've already done the project in Touchdown. How would the procurement person know what the name is? Are they going to contact the PMA to find out? It would be good if we had the same name for the procurement project as the Touchdown project, as the PTA form, as the requisition in Ariba, which is eventually the PO. I've seen it where each one of those had a different name, and even there's a few more names there. I'm hoping we can get to more of a standardized name. So if the project is called one name, it's the same for the procurement project as if the security, because it can be quite confusing when it's named differently all over. So I'm hoping that as a result of this, the naming starts to become more standardized. As we, and that's been the case as we've been using it and testing it out, because this form will fill it out in each with the same name. Now we did have one where we named it and then somebody didn't like that name and went in and changed it in one of the forms. And then we're going to run into that if we do that, because everybody's brain works different. So it seems like what makes sense in one domain might not make as much sense in another. But I think we'll get a little more standardized, and maybe as we go down this path, maybe even more so. I'll talk more about the collaboration with the PMA and even the BRMs, how that will work. Oh, if projects have more than one procurement, that is a good point. I think this will accommodate it. You would just say that an IT project already exists for this procurement project. And I hate that we have to call it a procurement project and then we have an IT project, but Ariba calls it a procurement project, so we're stuck with that a little bit. Are all questions required to be answered to move forward? yes, everything's required, but as you could see, you could put NA in there. We want to do our best to answer all the questions because it's really hard for security to do their job if you just put NA. And whereas right now we're not bouncing them back, if maybe at some point I can envision where AI or something can say, hey, you need a little bit better answer here. Right now, we're just requiring answers for every field. And when we've been doing the test, except for the security part, and then when we did have a security person helping us, we were able to do answers for everything. So how will this interact with the SharePoint PTA form that the ESRMO uses? It creates the SharePoint PTA form for you. So if you've already got a PTA there, when you get to that section, you can say, yeah, we've already started this. But if you don't have one, overnight, it will create the SharePoint PTA form for you. And that SharePoint PTA form, as most of you probably know, is a work in progress. So if we do this at the beginning of the procurement, we're not going to know maybe all the security items we'll know by the end of the procurement. So as we select a vendor, so that PTA is a work in progress and needs to be updated. But we want to get as much information in the PTA form at the beginning to help them in their analysis so they can guide us. Some PTAs also have multiple procurements involved. And I think when that happens, you can do the procurement form and then you're just indicating that there already is a PTA in process. So it should accommodate that. I see one about OSBM be engaged in the process to speed up their approvals even after they approved the project. I will say that with a lot of the things we did in our dashboards and mapping out each step of the procurement process, we are now looking at our sticky points. One of the sticky points we're looking at is the RFQ legal negotiation process. So we have Missy Sawyer. I don't know if you know her, but she is a really good process engineer, and she has been working with us. We're mapping out the project. We're looking at every single handoff in that RFQ process, and there are a number of things that it's no wonder why we have issues when you looked at all the sticky points and tough parts when you do an RFQ negotiation, just all the handoffs and communications. It's no wonder things get lost. We also noticed that with OSBM, with their approvals, and we just kind of kicked that off, but we've identified that as another opportunity that we can approve upon. And so I expect, even with the OneForm and with some of the things we're doing, sometimes an OSBM delay is really because they don't have the information they need to do their job. So maybe if we can include that information much earlier in the procurement, including setting up budget accounts. So let's just say you get $2 million in the August budget. Why not set up the account codes and all of that accounting early on in the fall instead of waiting till after? And I'm not being critical of anybody, but we've noticed some things like that. Like we might wait until we're ready to cut the PO to set all that up, and that's what OSBM is looking at, and rightly so. So maybe if we have all that set up earlier, it helps that part of the process. So that is one area we're looking at. Like I said, the RFQs we're looking at. Is the process what I would call perfect right now or the best experience ever? No, but to me, this is us trying to become Chick-fil-A. We're trying now to be the place where we're going to go out and take your order and get it in the system and help push you along so that when you see when it seems like there's a big long line waiting for procurement, you kind of go and say, oh, well, it really wasn't that bad. And we moved swiftly through the line and it was somewhat enjoyable experience and everybody was nice. That's what we want to get to. And we've shown it. We had a RFP that took 45 days. We've had some other ones that we've gotten out in the street in 1 or 2 weeks. And it wasn't statewide procurement doing anything special. It was all of us. It was the agency. It was us and the agency working really close and all the reviewers lined up and doing it. And when you start to do stuff like that, I think it helps us know what we can do. And so, that becomes what we strive for. I would not want to get to where we're doing every RFP in 45 days. Don't hear me that way, because that can be a little tough and a little stressful, but we don't want them to be taken 2 years. So there's a nice balance in between, 45 days and 6 months that we'd like to achieve there. Other RFPs have been started and finished in less than 5 months. We can see in our dashboard that when we have that standard schedule, and we haven't changed the generic schedule yet, but there are lots of examples of procurements that are getting done quicker than, months, 3, 4, 5 months ahead of schedule. There's also some that, we've struggled with. Like I said, the negotiation piece can be tough, but we're working to improve that. Are there any other questions? We have not looked at using it with the e-forms. We've got a solution for DOT, which is our primary user of e-forms. After that, we'll see how many we have left, and we might, look to see if there's a better e-form process. We have an idea there, and that would allow you to use the dashboard, which is really helpful. I don't think we'll have the OneForm available for DIT e-forms, but we might have another solution. So the question Ken asked, data classified as low risk, it's still state data. Yeah, if it's low risk data, but we're not as concerned about it. In the case of uniforms, it might be your uniform size. We're not so concerned with Ken having hit the size of a uniform, but there, you could start going down that road where there could be other data. In that case, maybe we rule that, or we look and say, okay, this is still a P&C procurement, but it does have some state data, so they should include security in doing that review, just to make sure we're crossing all the boxes and looking at it correctly. And we can get to the procurement finish line, even though there is a little bit of state data in there. But that's something that we've worked out with P&C, and they're ready to deal with. I think the main thing is we don't want to go back and forth and delay the procurement. Thank you for joining this. I hope you found this helpful.